Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go, free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on April 5th, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Now, before we get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern Time. However, you can listen to it, as I said, on karmicevolution.com, or you can listen to it on any of your favorite podcast stations like iHeartRadio or iTunes or Google or whatever. I also want to remind everyone I'm continuing to offer my 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for $125, which is a discounted rate for podcast listeners only. So if you are eager to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime and what may be holding you back from achieving that, then this reading is for you. This reading is great for people who really want to know why they are here, and if they feel stuck or frustrated or otherwise stymied in areas of importance to them. For some people it's relationships, for others it's career, which is often attached to finances, but not always, and others it's their health. So those tend to be the major areas that people want to know about, and they want to know why they are in the positions that they are in. We look at what got you to this point. So if you'd like to understand how, by letting your unconscious script, which is based on old soul conditioned behaviors and habits, which are usually unconscious from the past, if you want to look at how you've been letting them run the show, in other words, become more knowledgeable about that, more conscious about that, rather than just running on an old script, and, that is something that this reading can help you do. And if you'd like to participate in co-creating your own future happiness through astrological insight, then this reading is definitely for you. And as I like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of this special discounted offer, which you can find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. And I ask everyone to please bear in mind, although everybody wants to know what's going to happen tomorrow, next month, next year, next decade, it is important to look at your natal chart or your birth chart because it's a soul map for your whole life's journey. So in that sense, we need to do the natal chart reading first before we look at what the planets are doing in your chart now. In other words, the external planets and how they are aspecting or affecting your natal configuration. So the reading is not about what's going to happen. It's not that much of a predictive or forecasting. And if you have any knowledge about astrology in general, older traditional astrologers tend more towards prediction, which is sort of like saying, well, this is going to happen as opposed to this might happen. And modern astrologers, especially those like me who have a psychological and evolutionary standpoint or viewpoint, we look at what the energies represent is a way to forecast rather than predict. But I get ahead of myself. So what I want to reiterate again, is we look at what patterns were set at birth that may reflect what happened to you early in this lifetime, and or patterns that may have been set also or alternatively in past life karma. And the one thing we know for those who study past life regression work and past life karma stuff is that you didn't have just one past life, you had many past lives. So it's not really so much about looking where your soul is now in the scheme of things. It's about looking at your soul's journey over time to see how there is still room for you to evolve in consciousness. None of us are completely unconscious, and none of us are totally conscious. I think, I mean, a lot of that stuff is man-made, but we can believe whatever we want. But astrology, or the kind of astrology that I practice, believes that you can become more and more conscious every day, and that astrology is simply a tool that you can understand to understand your basic soul map, your basic birth chart, your basic natal chart. Those two terms are synonymous, so that you can proceed to better understand what path the universe is calling you to follow now. And then you do a transits and progressions reading, because that goes into great detail about the specifics of what you've learned from the natal chart reading, where it resonated with you, and then it's much easier to go, oh, I get it now. Okay, so Uranus is saying blah, 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 because you said it's in the 9th house, and I want to enroll in school, or I want to begin to teach. Okay, cool. Or I want to start my own publication. So things fall into place very easily. But what I'm saying to you is that the Karmic Evolution Natal Insight offer, which you can easily find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125, is a discounted reading that will set you on the path to better understanding your whole life's energies, so that you can then move forward with much greater consciousness and help use your intuition and your instinctive powers to be able to make decisions more easily. Because once you know the past, it's easier to decide what you don't want to repeat from the past and would rather move forward into in the future. All right, so now let's get to this week's astro news you can use. First, as is my usual, we'll review some of the things that I noted last week about the Mercury retrograde station in Aries, which stationed at 27 degrees and 10 minutes of Aries there, as well as the upcoming Aries New Moon solar eclipse, which everyone is all abuzz about because it's only a few days away, and that will occur at 19 degrees and 24 minutes of Aries at 11:21 a.m. Pacific time and 2:21 p.m. Eastern time on April 8th. So the interesting thing about these two events, the solar eclipse upcoming and the Mercury station retrograde in Aries, which happened on April 1st, is that I noted last week when I quoted astrologer Ronnie Dreyer from her recent talk on the meaning of this set of spring eclipses, the one that just passed on March 25th, and the one coming up on April 8th, is that just like during the Great American Eclipse of 2017, as it's now known, this upcoming solar eclipse not only falls in a great arc across the United States, this one starting in the southwest this time, out of Mexico. The last one started off the Oregon coast and went south. This one starts in the southwest and goes across out of Mexico through Texas, etc., and leaves, exits after it hits or goes through Maine. But so they form an X, in other words, and astrologers are looking at where the X meets, and that's something that Ronnie Dreyer talked about, because when an eclipse occurs, it's important from what geographical location you can actually view the eclipse, not so much from the to say, oh, I had the experience of viewing the eclipse, not for that purpose, but for the purpose of pinpointing where the eclipse may have its greatest effects, because that's where the shadow fell geographically. So in this case, in 2017, it fell as an X from the West Coast, the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, down through, I think it was South Carolina. And this one comes up from Mexico through Texas and exits through Maine. So if you know your geography at all, you can imagine in your head that this is one great X. So, after the fact, we'll talk about where the X met, because it's potentially highly probable that there will be some stories out of that area. So that remains to be seen. But anyway, and the fact also, which I mentioned last week, that Ronnie had mentioned, is that like in 2017, this eclipse is happening during a Mercury retrograde period. Now, Ronnie Dreyer noted that because of the prominence of Mercury at and during this upcoming eclipse, and the fact that Mercury represents communication, intelligence, travel, trade, and commerce, that these themes will come into notice during this period, as they have already. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But the other important factor to notice is that Mars is currently waxing towards a conjunction to Saturn in Pisces, which perfects on April 10th, and that this will be followed by an inferior conjunction, and inferior meaning it happens during Mercury's retrograde period, when the Sun meets Mercury, or Mercury, the faster moving planet, meets the Sun, and they're both, the Sun never goes retrograde, but Mercury is direct. It's the superior conjunction. This one is the inferior conjunction because it happens when the Mercury and the Sun already conjoined, and now Mercury is heading back to conjoin again. And that Sun-Mercury inferior conjunction will happen in Aries on April 11th. So we have, as I said, the Mars-Saturn conjunction on April 10th, followed by the Sun-Mercury on April 11th. And we'll get more into that in a few, too. So because the Aries New Moon solar eclipse on April 8th has both luminaries meeting with the wounded healer Chiron, all three at 19 degrees Aries, as they separate from the North Node at 15 degrees and 37 minutes Aries, and that's the true node, and approach Mercury and the dwarf planet Eris, the goddess of chaos and discord, both at 24 degrees Aries. We've got, and Mercury, of course, retrograde, we've got quite a mixed bag of energies that very neatly, in some ways, seem to reflect recent events of this past week, and now as we head toward Monday's solar eclipse. Now, eclipses bring things to the forefront, and that's something that I quoted Ronnie Dreyer saying, and as I noted last week, they reveal what formerly has been eclipsed or hidden from our view. So in that sense, they're often revelatory, and astrologers often link the effects of an eclipse, both from its energies within the collective, and personally, if they happen to touch a sensitive point in one's chart, they liken it as akin to a jump start to a car battery. So 1 minute, everything is quiet, everything is status quo, and the engine is dead, and the next, there's an electrical jolt and the car roars to life. So such a sudden jolt may prove pleasant or unpleasant, again, depending on the energies of all the planets present at the eclipse and how that eclipse might fit into any one individual's chart in terms of what it might trigger there. We see collective events. Many astrologers who do mundane astrology will look to see where the eclipse is in a particular region, just like this one, because everyone here in America is abuzz, and probably in Mexico, about the fact that the eclipse is going to be seen here in America. So because Mars is approaching Saturn right now, and will be approaching Saturn still during the eclipse until they conjoin on April 10th, this eclipse has a Mars-Saturn flavor, and that's something that I quoted Ronnie Dreyer as saying last week, and she also quoted the well-known astrologer Alan Oken, who is sadly no longer with us, who used to define this aspect as like driving your car with the brakes on. And so the frustration of such stop-and-go type energy becomes and has already been, as we shall see, one of the major themes of this eclipse season. Now, Mars is, and I include the March 25th eclipse in that. So Mars is related to motivation and movement and ambition. It wants to get things done and quickly. But Saturn is slow and cautious archetypally. It's an earth sign that astrologers often relate to heavy metals such as lead. In other words, Saturn doesn't move quickly no matter what Mars says to him or how much he tries to push or persuade him. Now, evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest, who was one of my mentors, equates the Mars-Saturn combination of energies as providing us, in the end, with two different choices. We may know that we have tasks to complete, but decide to avoid them. That's the Saturnian, well, let me think about it for a while and consider all my options before I act. I don't want to be too hasty. I'm not sure. Versus Mars, let's do it now, and then we can finish it and get into something else. So Saturn doesn't trust Mars' speed, while Mars thinks Saturn is a big stick in the mud who never wants to get anything done fast enough. And our two choices, according to Forrest, are about whether we'd rather feel fatigued and depressed or in the end exhausted and happy. And that's because if we decide to procrastinate, one foot on the brake, and allow our work, our duties, or our obligations to hang heavily over our head, it can make us feel tired. It can make us really tired, sometimes even depressed, because Saturn is, in psychological astrology, often related, depending on how it manifests in your chart, as depression. Meanwhile, Mars is nagging Saturn to get it done already. So we skip out entirely, block it out of our mind, decide that we don't ever want to do today what we can put off till tomorrow or something similar. And we go to bed every night with an oppressive feeling that weighs heavily on us, and we wake up kind of depressed. Oh, God, I didn't do that. Oh, my God, I got to clean out the garage. Oh, my God, I don't want to do it, right? However, if we get to the point where we decide, okay, today's the day. If we apply some muscle, we get to cleaning out that garage this Saturday, take the car for a wash or a detail, make all our obligatory doctor's appointments, fix that broken closet door, or whatever, with the foot on the gas, we may end our day exhausted but happy because we now feel accomplished. And that's something that Saturn can actually get behind once he lets his foot up off the brake, right? So that's something to keep in mind now as we're still in, under the auspices of these two eclipses. And I spoke last week about how long they can last. So I refer you back to then because the 19-degree Aries eclipse started back around January 20th, 21st, as I mentioned last week. And the one on March 25th, the transiting nodes, which are regressing, they're at 19 now at this eclipse, they're at 15 during this eclipse, but they will be moving backwards and won't hit the 5-degree Libra March 25th eclipse degree until sometime next November. So again, I refer you to last week's podcast for more on that. But Mercury station retrograde in Aries on April 1st, combined with the Venus-Neptune conjunction in Pisces on April 3rd, and Venus's entrance into Aries on April 4th and 5th, depending on your time zone, and including also Venus's sextile to Pluto, it's Venus then, of course, in Aries, sextile to Pluto in Aquarius on April 6th, are leading us toward the April 8th Aries New Moon solar eclipse. So meanwhile, let's look now at how these energies, especially the waxing Mars-Saturn conjunction, which will perfect again on April 10th, and the Sun-Mercury conjunction in Aries on April 11th, which I will anticipate is going to result in some kind of major announcements. And I say announcements because, who knows from where. I've explained already the Sun is often a ruler or a leader of a country or somebody prominent in the world. And when he meets Mercury, there's communication. Now, because the Mercury will be retrograde, any announcement will likely have to do with something from the past that is now under review. But in any case, what I want to point out is that both of these energies, Mars-Saturn conjunction and Sun-Mercury retrograde conjunction, are both waxing during this April 8th eclipse, meaning they're gaining strength then. They're gaining it now, and they'll be even more strengthened by April 8th before they actually exact on April 10th and 11th. So they are a very heavy influence during this October, listen to me, April 8th, I'm 6 months ahead, this April 8th solar eclipse. But what's important to realize, looking back, is that a little less than a week ago and a couple days after my last podcast on March 29th, we had the April 1st third quarter waning monthly lunar square of the Capricorn moon to the Aries sun. So stop, wait, hold on a second. Do you see the correlation between the waxing Mars-Saturn conjunction energy here? After all, the moon in Capricorn, now this is already passed, all right, so we can see this. The moon in Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and the sun in Aries is ruled by Mars, right? So these are also both cardinal energies, meaning they initiate events and circumstances. But once again, we have the same theme which flavors this whole eclipse season, as Ronnie Dreyer pointed out, 1 foot on the gas and 1 on the brake. And in addition, at that square, this past Monday on April 1st, the moon was conjoining the dwarf planet Ceres, with the moon at 12 degrees and Ceres at 16 degrees of Capricorn, respectively. And together, they were both squaring the Aries sun. So the moon squared the sun exact at 12 degrees Aries. And they both squared the transiting nodal axis, both the true and the mean nodal axis, the mean node at 15 degrees 59 minutes and the true node at 15:37, respectively. As this was happening on April 1st, bearing in mind that Mars at 7 Pisces was already waxing toward a conjunction to Saturn at 13 Pisces, and that Mars was opposing the goddess asteroid Juno, who is a significator of, quote-unquote, the wife or partner or partnership, was at 7 degrees Virgo. So Mars at 7 Pisces, Juno at 7 Virgo at that time on April 1st. And then Venus conjoined Neptune at 27 Pisces. This bottom line, in my opinion, is that this translated and now translates still into extreme frustration with any romanticized visions of partnership that bear no actual resemblance to reality. So the tension here was palpable, as Ceres represents sustenance, both in the form of literal food, and I've explained this before, but for those who are newcomers, I will do so again as briefly as I can. Ceres in Roman mythology is the equivalent of Demeter in Greek myth, the goddess of the grain who holds the secret of how the seed gets fertilized. And Demeter in Greek mythology was the mother of Persephone, who was kidnapped and raped by Pluto, Hades, the god of the underworld. Now, when we talk about the symbology of rape, this is not, a positive thing, of course, but symbolically, the rape is the initiation of the maiden into the wife, the mother, the eventual mother, the crone, right? The sexual initiation. It is often when Venus is in combination with Pluto that it can be, and when Mars is around, that can be violent, okay? But in terms of the mythology, it was not so much about the rape as it was about the symbolism of an initiation, all right? So you may recall, if you listened to me speak about this before, or if you know it yourself, that then Demeter stopped the crops from growing because she was mourning the disappearance of her daughter until the gods intervened and eventually brokered a deal to allow Persephone excuse me, to come above ground 6 months out of each year. So this is how the Greeks originally explained the seasons. And of course, Greek mythology, Roman mythology is Western astrology. So in the West, we have the 4 seasons. And when Persephone did come above ground in the spring and the summer, Demeter Ceres allowed the crops to be planted and fertilized in the spring and grown during the summer. In the fall, when Persephone had to return to the underworld, the crops were harvested and the ground lay fallow, as symbolic of Demeter's mourning period until the next spring rolls around and mother and daughter are once again happily reunited. Now, as mentioned, this Ceres combination with the third quarter lunar square on April 1st, coincidentally with Mars retrograde station, that 2 days later on April 3rd, Venus exact conjoined Neptune in Pisces, meaning that these energies were strongly in play at the third quarter lunar square, as I said, involving Ceres. Now, astrologer Rob Hand, who wrote the book Planets in Transit, describes this aspect, and even though it's fleeting because Venus moves relatively quickly, as a time when we might, and here I quote him, confuse the ideal with the real. So Venus and Neptune in Pisces, when they come together, is great for dreamers, but not so good for dealing with concrete reality. And we can see this quite clearly through this collective example. The energy is terrific for artists and creatives because it puts them in that mindful, meditative state through which they can channel their dreams and ideas, their artistic, visions, etc. But and same for psychics, channeling it's a good time to hear the messages. But this does not necessarily mean more than simple creative expression or reception of the transmission from the divine, okay? It doesn't mean that you can actually manifest what you're hearing or what you're experiencing or what you're feeling. You can express it, but it doesn't mean it's going to last or anything like that. So, for example, it doesn't guarantee that one will become a famous artist or a musician or a dancer, etc. Only that one has the desire and the inspiration and the impetus to create. I hear these lyrics in my head, I'm going to sit down at the piano and maybe I'll write a song, right? But it takes the actual work. It takes Saturn to actually sit there and do the work of finalizing an entire song, right? So that comes later, but you need that germ, that seed of the inspiration, and that's what the Venus Neptune is about. But it also can help us realize how things were not meant to be. So when I reflect on all these energies, I realize how in combination with the third quarter monthly lunar square and the moon Ceres square to the karmic transiting nodes, this energy is aptly described by the April 1st Reuters news piece out of Jerusalem, which is headlined, thousands of Israelis took to the streets in Jerusalem on Monday, which was April 1st, continuing a 3-day protest against the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and demanding new elections. The protests have gathered in intensity as the war in Gaza nears the end of its 6th month, and anger at the government's handling of the 134 Israeli hostages still held by the Islamist movement Hamas in Gaza has grown. So, what this has revealed to us, along with the waxing Mars-Saturn square yet to perfect, is that the fantasy of completely annihilating Hamas, the fantasy on the part of the Israelis, and at the same time ensuring the safe return of all of the hostages, is not going to happen easily. And no small thing, it has cost the lives of upwards of 32,000 Gazans to date, including a large number of both women and children. So I think it is easy to understand and have empathy with, but also be completely frustrated about the fact that this war is really on a lot of levels at an impasse because the whole original intention of it, both sides, the intention of Hamas to perpetrate what it did upon the Israelis, to have as a goal the freedom of Gazans and Palestinians, and on the Israeli side to, as I said before, completely annihilate Hamas and gain the release of his hostages, is now really being revealed as completely, what I said is the unrealistic nature of Israel's goal of defeating and eliminating Hamas while simultaneously gaining the release of his hostages is being more clearly revealed as we approach the April 8th solar eclipse. And in similar fashion, the World Central Kitchen, whose chef Jose Andres is frequently highlighted on the news for the great work he's been doing both in Ukraine, both in Gaza, and in many, many different places around the world historically. They had to pause operations in Gaza after 7 aid workers were killed, quote-unquote, unintentionally by Israeli airstrikes on April 1st also. So remember what I said about Ceres being archetypally linked to sustenance. And I see sustenance as related to two things, both literal food and faith. Because as I've mentioned before in this show, if our bellies are full, it is much easier to have faith in the belief that we will never want for food. And such is not the case right now in Gaza, as we know. Ceres is squaring on April 1st, or around then, it was squaring the karmic transiting nodes. Right? Something's got to give. In addition, since then, several other aid groups have also suspended operations in Gaza, including one called Anera, which has been in the region for a half century. As famine sets in, Gaza's starving population is relying on aid to help feed its residents. They're calling, like I said, in order to resume their operations, they need an immediate surge ceasefire and a surge in aid, according to one of the ANERA's board members. And to further exemplify how serious this is, on April 3rd, and again in alignment with saying, okay, this was a fantasy too, the New York Times reported this: Middle East crisis, aid groups pull back after workers are killed, deepening Gaza's food crisis. The World Central Kitchen sent ships with hundreds of tons of food back to Cyprus. A deadly Israeli strike on an aid convoy run by World Central Kitchen in Gaza is already setting back attempts to address a hunger crisis in the territory, with aid groups saying they are being more cautious about making deliveries and at least 2 suspending operations. In the wake of the attack that killed 7 of its workers, World Central Kitchen stopped its work in Gaza and sent 3 ships with hundreds of tons of food back to the port in Cyprus. The food was meant to be unloaded at a makeshift jetty in northern Gaza that was built by the group, which says it has provided 43 million meals to Gazans since the start of the war. Now, recognize a jetty is like a pier, like a floating pier, right? So we've talked already in past podcasts about Saturn in Pisces, but now we're talking about Venus having conjoined Neptune in Pisces, and these kinds of trying to transport goods, Saturnian physical objects, over water, and how that has not been proven successful. So again, we can see right here, 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. We see this in stark relief, as well as that this involves not only food, sustenance, but also medical supplies, because the sun and the moon are now moving toward conjoining with the wounded healer Chiron at the Aries New Moon solar eclipse on April 8th. And not only that, but also this whole incident reveals the unrealistic attitude on all sides that their goals might be successfully accomplished. And I'm not denigrating that. I mean, the World Central Kitchen and the Jose Andres, the chef, and everyone involved obviously is extremely altruistic. They dedicated their mission and their lives to helping people, helping feed people. So it's a horrible thing. It's beyond words that someone tries to provide nurturing through food for people, including children, so that they don't starve to death, right? But that in the middle of this kind of conflagration, this kind of war, this kind of aggression, which is between two military operators, right? Because Hamas has stockpiled weapons, Israel has a military, and the United States supports them, right? So again, upon reflection, if we extrapolate all of this, of what I've said now, down to the level of the personal, we might all ask ourselves now, what dream did I plant at the March 10th Pisces New Moon, when the two luminaries came together in Pisces, that I'm now finding out was unrealistic, because I will be, in the end, unable to actually manifest it out in the world successfully? And where, at the March 25th 5-degree 7-minute Libra Full Moon, which was the lunar eclipse, did I need to release any tendency to fight rather than compromise in order to create an environment of peace and harmony? And I would say fight or relent, right? So it takes negotiation and compromise, but one part, one way that lunar eclipse could have manifested is in saying, no, it's like, and I've said this before, and last week and the week before, it's my way or the highway. And other people say, no, we have to sit down and negotiate and compromise. But then there's also the negative side of the Libra energy, which is, okay, have it your way. Go ahead, take everything, leave us with nothing, So that was the dilemma at that point. So the only natural answer is the integration, which is to negotiate and compromise for the sake of peace and harmony. And how, as we now approach the Aries New Moon solar eclipse, but are still right now today technically in the dark of the moon's monthly waning lunar cycle, can we recognize how, as Mercury's retrograde in Aries is calling us to review, how can I reorient my future creative aspirations, meaning using my instincts and my intuition to deal with the current situation, to ones that can become manifest in the real world down the road? It's at this solar eclipse on April 8th that a new instinct for what lies ahead, given that the old one has now been revealed to be unworkable, must replace our old one with something both more creative but also more realistic. And therein lies the compromise. You can see it right there. Therein lies the integration necessary here, right? Because this eclipse tells us, since Chiron is heavily involved, that is what we need to do to heal. So that this may involve a good deal of frustration until we get to that point, again, both collectively and personally, depending, seems evident when we realize how the collective is reflecting the heavens' energies back to us now. So the call is to let go of fantasy and to proactively procreate a new reality. And that's what this eclipse is all about, but it will take a period of review. Ronnie Dreyer said last week, and I've seen this echoed not only from other astrologers, but also from the collective, like on the news or in the written, in the newspapers or even the magazine articles. It's time for spring cleaning. Now, it's interesting to me because, of course, it's time for spring cleaning. It's April, right? But it's the eclipse's energies that are telling us that as well, and the other energies, right? We need to clean things out. We need to open up space for something new to come in. So what's interesting, too, is that the proof that Israel's old dream of victory against Hamas and the rescue of its hostages wasn't going to work lies with several of the energies reflected back to us this past week, including the news yesterday, April 4th, as Venus approached her entrance into Mars-ruled Aries. This was reported yesterday afternoon in the New York Times. Biden tells Netanyahu that U.S. support hinges on treatment of Gaza civilians. President Biden threatened on Thursday to condition future support for Israel on how it addresses his concerns about civilian casualties and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, attempting for the first time to leverage American aid to influence the conduct of the war against Hamas. Can you feel at least a little bit of Aries energy in that? Let's work on a plan to, to come up with some Venusian, reality, right? To solution, Venusian solution. There you go. I just coined a new term. And the New York Times piece goes on, during an evidently tense 30-minute call, frustration, Mars Saturn, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, Mr. Biden went further than ever before in pressing for change in the military operation that has inflamed many Americans and others around the world. But the White House stopped short of directly saying the president would halt arms supplies or impose conditions for their use, as fellow Democrats have urged him to do. Now, there's plenty of criticism of Biden. It's not that I'm not going to get into that. It's just that I have some other things that I want to talk about that still illustrate these same energies, and I don't want to run out of time. But because there's a lot of things that I can just talk about very peripherally. America, the government also just did release a whole bunch of weapons to Israel. So I'll leave it to you to Google that on your own. But, whether that's talking out of two sides of his mouth or whatever, but Biden, as many have criticized him, has been very timid at actually standing up to Netanyahu in terms of denying him American aid, whether that's in form of money or in the form of actual weaponry. Now, I think that these energies that I've been talking about are likewise true when we get to issues like talking about the U.S. Congress. For example, impeaching President Biden, which at this point has zero factual basis in reality because the GOP, which seeks to do so, has no provable committed crimes or misdemeanors on which to charge Biden with, right? So this becomes even more true or clear when we realize that the House GOP has lost several representatives through the announcement by two who are retiring soon, and that this will leave Majority Speaker Mike Johnson with eventually a majority of only one. In addition, the House GOP's ability to hold up legislation such as funding for Ukraine to help its defense against Russian aggression, now more than 2 years old, is rapidly becoming ever more unrealistic day by day. And finally, it's an unrealistic dream on the part of the GOP that it can actually legislate for the American people successfully when it's based on its political philosophy, especially since the Trump administration years, that of thinking that no Republican need ever cross the aisle in bipartisan fashion to get anything done. That was exemplified by the fact that a bipartisan congressional committee hammered out the southern border issue and came to terms on it, and the Speaker of the House wouldn't bring it to the floor because he spoke to Donald Trump, who told him not to do it. Now, this GOP position, what I'm trying to say, is an ephemeral dream at best, because it's now being illustrated by the fact that Speaker Johnson knows he needs Democrats' support to pass both this legislation and to keep his speakership, should Marjorie Taylor Greene invoke the pink slip notice that she gave him last week, stating that she could call a vote to oust him. But now there's only one GOP member more than the Democratic members. So, hello, things are getting even more slippery, and I'm getting the image of the quicksand, right? They're getting more, the GOP is more on quicksand than on terra firma, which proves the point of what I've been saying also. Now, along those lines, but more locally, we also heard this past week that in Florida, right, which had passed, the Governor DeSantis there had signed into law a 6-week abortion ban a couple months ago. There was a stay on that, but the other day the Florida Supreme Court decided, I think this was April 3rd or right before the Neptune, this Venus-Neptune conjunction, they lifted the stay, allowing the 6-week abortion ban to go into effect, but they allowed Florida voters to have a ballot initiative that would protect abortion up to 24 weeks. Now, a ballot initiative means that voters can vote on the issue. So this energy is growing only stronger since, Venus entered Mars ruled Aries, as I said last night, this morning, bringing the goddess of love and harmonious and peaceful relationships into the warrior realm. And when she sextiles Pluto in Aquarius, which she will do on April 6th, she becomes a symbol and a warrior, right, of empowering groups of people, and here we're talking about women, in terms of societal reform. Now, Rob Hand, who I've sat through many lectures, who's given many lectures I've sat through, I guess that's a better way to put it, and I'm always reading his Planets in Transit book, often talks about Pluto, the slowest moving planet. I talk about him as evolutionary change, and the key word that many astrologers who are new students to astrology use the word transformation. He talks about it being a symbol, the planet itself, an archetypal symbol of societal reform. And I happened to catch the tail end of an interview, I think it was last Sunday, I'm not sure, on MSNBC, and I don't remember what show, or maybe I watched a clip on YouTube, I don't know. But there was an interview with Washington State Governor Inslee, I forgot his first name, and here's a quote from him. He said, and this to me was perfect to reflect these energies. He said, "It's time for a bunch of old men to stop telling women what to do." Now, there's a couple of issues, and I'm going to run out of time in about 5 minutes or a little more, so I want to get them in quickly, related to Donald Trump, right? Related to this 1 foot on the brake and 1 foot on the gas. We know that also on April 1st, during all those aspects that I mentioned before, and with Mars-Saturn waxing towards its conjunction, he posted his $175 million bond in the New York State Attorney General's case that would have originally cost him $454 million in order to be able to appeal. So now, however, he can go ahead with his appeal, but the Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, won't be able to begin to touch any of his assets until the appeal comes to an end, one way or another. So his usual modus operandi of delay, which is what Saturn is very good at, comes to his rescue again. But for the Mars part, the foot on the gas, there's two things, or there's actually a few things, but one is the fact that his former press person, Hope Hicks, is going to be testifying at his New York DA trial, which was deemed by the judge able to go ahead with jury selection on April 15th. And that, and hold on a second, I think there's something going on that day. Yeah, that will be the day of the second quarter square after the Aries New Moon solar eclipse, and that will be the moon in Cancer squaring the sun in Aries, again a cardinal square. So it'll be interesting to watch that, because as we know also, there's a huge amount of frustration over the gag order that was put into place by Judge Juan Merchan, who is overseeing this New York DA trial, which is the hush money trial. I'm sorry, I might have gotten you confused. April 15th is when Trump posted the bond for the case that was decided that his Trump organization was defrauding New York taxpayers by over and undervaluing his assets. The trial that's going to start on April 15th is the first trial, a criminal trial. The other one was civil. The E. Jean Carroll case was civil. This is the first criminal trial that involves Donald Trump, and says that he basically engaged in election fraud, election interference. They call it the hush money trial that involves the porn star Stormy Daniels. But the truth is that this is very much like the Nixon Watergate hearings, because he obstructed justice by hiring those burglars and then paying for them so that American citizens, when he raided the Democrats' office, wouldn't know what was going on, but it was for the purpose of aiding his reelection. The same thing is true here, right? So Trump's goal to affect the 2020, I'm sorry, that was the 2016 election after that tape came out where he said, grab them by the you-know-what, that was hidden, right? Because he didn't want anyone to know about his relationship with the porn star. So it was effectively election interference. In Nixon's case, it was for re-election. In Trump's case, it was for first-time election. And then, of course, there's his Truth Social SPAC, which is a creative financial, instrument which went public the Friday before and stands to gain him $7 billion. But already that stock market valuation has plummeted. All right, so again, he has this fantasy that he's going to become an actual billionaire now, but already it seems to have been devalued. In a piece printed by the New York Times on April 3rd, as we were waxing towards the Venus-Neptune conjunction, actually that occurred in the morning, so that by that day was already perfected at 6:10 a.m. Pacific time and 9:10 a.m. Eastern time. Here's what the Times said. Traders are betting millions that Trump media will tumble. The parent company of Truth Social is a popular target for short sellers, even after they lost $100 million last month betting on a decline in the stock that didn't come. So it says, Trump media is the most shorted special purpose acquisition vehicle, or SPAC, in the country, according to the financial data company S3 Partners. And the article says in part, before former President Donald Trump's social media company made its stock market debut, many investors were lining up to bet on its collapse. After the company's share price plunged following an initial surge, the appetite to bet against the stock has grown even ravenous. Trump Media and Technology Group, which trades under the ticker DJT, slipped on Wednesday to below $50 per share, extending a steep decline this week that pulled the stock down from its high near $80 and erased more than $2 billion of market value. And the piece goes on to describe what shorting is and stuff like that, but I'm sure you can find that if you're not a Times subscriber on other sites, and you can Google that. So again, the fantasy, I'm going to be a billionaire, and the valuation of the stock is very suspect, because the Truth Social lost millions of dollars last year, and this is worth 51 million. This whatever. You can Google the details, but the point is that it seems also to be built on quicksand. Also on April 4th, the judge in Georgia rejected an effort by Donald Trump and his allies to have the Georgia criminal case against them dismissed. And the same day, Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida dismissed Trump's attempts to have the trial dismissed. I think this was, hang on, let me tell you. Okay, I just came across this in the New York Times. This is from April 4th. And it's an op-ed piece, and it's titled, Jack Smith Finally Loses His Patience. It says, related to what I've been saying about the Mars-Saturn waxing conjunction, if there is a more justifiably frustrated man in America right now than Jack Smith, the federal special prosecutor on the Donald Trump cases, I'd like to meet him. And he talks about the fact that, he says, this week Smith finally lost his patience with Eileen Cannon, the novice federal judge, handling the case that involves Trump's illegal retention of highly classified national security documents. And he goes on to outline the bizarre order that she made, which you can Google about on, just about anywhere also, where she says, in a brief filed on Tuesday, Smith said the order was based on a, quote, fundamentally flawed legal premise, and which this writer says, which is the polite way lawyers ask, "Are you really this dumb?" On top of that, Smith pointed out Trump's arguments for why the documents belong to him, essentially that by taking them from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, he magically converted them into his property, and again I quote, is not based on any facts, but was concocted more than a year after he left the White House. And he said that he ends the piece by saying that Smith has shown a superhuman level of patience up to this point. It's time for him to give up the charade and ask the 11th Circuit to remove her from the case and replace her with a judge who understands the job. Whoa, right? What did we used to say? Oh, snap! Back when I was in high school 100 million years ago. Anyway, so as I said, there's more stuff that just, I'm leaving you with the basics. I hope you got the gist of what I was saying about this upcoming eclipse's energies, what's been going on here, right? Give up the dream that's unworkable, that's not realistic, that's never going to happen, that's founded on quicksand, and revise, review, rethink, during the Mercury retrograde period, because Aries, of course, is about motivation. As I said before, it's about impetus. It's also about using our instincts, and from our instincts come our creative impetus, right? Ooh, I had an idea. So all this cardinal energy that's going on right now with these lunar squares and stuff, and the upcoming cardinality of the Aries New Moon solar eclipse can give us the energy to engage in this, but we still have to be thoughtful. We can't run willy-nilly out and just, plunk a bunch of money down on something new. We have to think about it. We have to check. That's where Saturn comes in. We have to check the details. Mercury, review the details. Saturn, is it possible? Is it workable? Is there a real possibility it can actually happen? And if it happens, what is the possibility it will actually be successful? All right. So, in any case, I'm going to sign off now and leave you with a happy eclipse, everyone. Don't fear it. There's nothing to fear. Change is good because the universe does not like stasis or stagnation. Change is the only constant, so remember that. And I thank you all for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your individual karmic evolution in this lifetime. And please be sure to join me next week on April 5th for another episode of that's today. April 5th is today. Join me on April 12th for another episode of this podcast. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.